Ave Maria Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Legionaries of Christ and I teach theology. This is a podcast on the StarQuest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 226. We're covering Apostolicum Axiositatem 31 to 32 on specific formation for some types of apostolate. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday we spoke about the need to form young Catholics for apostolate, and no area of their formation should ignore this important aspect of formation. Today we're going to conclude Chapter 6, Formation for the Apostolate. I think in the reading plan I actually put the Chapter 6 for next up, but it's really just an exhortation, like a conclusion, not part of the chapter for tomorrow, which is the last day of Apostolicum Axiositatem. And then today, as a summary, we have two ones that are a little bit different. The 31 is really about what we said before, that idea of forming different types of apostolate, and 32 is about publications, institutes for forming apostolate. So let's go straight on with paragraph 31. Paragraph 31 uses letters in the text, so there'll be a little bit, there's like one line before, and then there's A, B, C. It actually has a paragraph break in the middle of that A, but we're just going to ignore that subparagraph break and not mention it. But before an A is about the laity need to manifest Jesus to all people. B is about the importance of knowing the social doctrine of the church, and C is the importance of the works of mercy. So, this before and A, let's get into it and let's read it. Various types of the apostolate demand also a specifically suitable formation. A, in regard to the apostolate of evangelizing and sanctifying men, the laity must be specially formed to engage in conversation with other believers or non-believers in order to manifest Christ's message to all men. Since in our times different forms of materialism are spread far and wide even among Catholics, the laity should not only learn doctrine more diligently, especially those main points which are subjects of controversy, but also exhibit the witness of evangelical life in contrast to all forms of materialism. So as we see, this paragraph is going to be on those specific formation areas, as that kind of opening line indicates. And this part A is really talking about engaging with others. We need to bring Jesus to all. We need to respond to the materialism of our time. And it's not just, hey, we know doctrine, we know teaching, we know these things. No, but we live an evangelical life. We live a life in conformity to the evangelical counsels. What are the evangelical counsels? You might have forgotten: Prophetic Caritatis, poverty, chastity, and obedience. Anything you study on religious life, they're often called the vows, so we often think about them, but they're the evangelical counsels as a more broadly, and they're recommended as a way of life to respond to the materialism of our world. Not that you're going to live in destitute poverty, but you're not going to be ostentatious, and you're going to be giving your money to help others and things, not just all hoarding your hundreds of millions of dollars or anything like that. So, moving on to B, it talks about the importance of knowing social doctrine. So, in the summary, I'll talk about social doctrine after we cover the paragraph. Let's read it. B, in regard to Christian renewal, of the temporal order, the laity should be instructed in the true meaning and value of temporal things, both in themselves and in relation to all the aims of the human person. They should be trained in the right use of things and the organization of institutions, attentive always to the common good in line with the principles of moral and social teachings of the Church. Laymen should above all learn the principles and conclusions of the social doctrine so as to become capable of working for the development of this doctrine to the best of their ability, and of rightly applying the same principles and conclusions to individual cases. So what is social doctrine of the Church? It is the idea of church teachings applied to things like politics, economics, business, things like that, and how the church has something to say about all these secular realities. Gaudium et Spes, which we'll cover at the end of the year, it's the last document, it has a lot of this. It's kind of the social encyclical document. It's obviously not an encyclical, it's a council document, but it has that idea. And often the social doctrine, we often talk about the different social documents from Rerum Novarum, back with Leo XIII to all the different ones. John Paul II wrote like 3 and things like that. And the idea here is we have to say, okay, the church is not just in the church, but it has something to say about man's daily life, his professional life, and these things of business and other aspects. And those are important to talk about. So that's what we're going to cover in this area. And it's important to know this. One of the things I note is that most Catholic colleges, I wouldn't say all, but a lot of Catholic colleges will require bioethics for all the people doing any kind of medical things like pre-med, nursing, etc. But they won't require a social doctrine class for all the people in economics, business, and related fields, even though that is an important area of church teaching. And that's important to get this formation of people. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about in this specialized formation for people in these professional fields. We need to have these temporal realities ordered rightly, and we need to value them rightly, which is what it's saying. Use things rightly, and this makes them able to apply Christian principles in the secular temporal world and brings Jesus into it, even if people don't explicitly recognize this from Jesus. It is from the church, and so it is from Jesus. Finally, paragraph 31C is about the importance of the works of mercy. Let's read it. C. Since the works of charity and mercy express the most striking testimony of the Christian life, apostolic formation should lead also to the performance of these works so that the faithful may learn from childhood on to have compassion for their brethren, to be generous in helping those in need. This is a great witness. If we look at the building of a church historically, we would see that there'd be a great plague and then the church would grow as a percentage afterwards. Why? Well, because the Christians were the ones out there helping the plague victims and things like that. The pagans were all like, oh, whatever, these people, let them die out there in the plague. The Christians were all like, oh, these people are dying of the plague. We need to go help them. We look at people in my own lifetime, and probably the person who's converted the most people in my own lifetime is Mother Teresa. Some of you are younger, might have been born after she was alive, but I would say especially the first half of my life or so, where she was still alive. She died when I was like 18, so I guess a little less than half my life. But she was a huge conversion thing in the second half of the 20th century. So many people were converted by her example, and that is important. But it's also important to form our own heart so we have that care for the poor, care for the needy, care for the sick, because that's important as Christians. And I personally think, this is not a doctrine or anything, but I think that we as Christians, no matter what our role is, we should strive to do at least something of this physical charity, corporal works of mercy at a somewhat regular basis. Obviously, some people are going to be more dedicated to it. People like myself, I'm not going to be that my full-time thing or my main thing, but I try and do it a little bit on my own where I can. And sometimes with our modern society, sometimes the structure and getting into volunteer can be a challenge, but it's good to strive to do that, even if it doesn't work out perfectly, because I've sometimes gone longer than I would like without it just because of trying to find a place that they're looking for volunteers where it can fit my schedule and things. Moving on to paragraph 32. It has 4 subparagraphs. The first 3 on publication institutes that help with apostolic formation are good. And the last one, D, is about, hey, we need to support the existing ones and call for more of them. So let's read A through C. 32A. There are many aids for laypersons devoted to the apostolate, namely study sessions, congresses, periods of recollection, spiritual exercises, frequent meetings, conferences, books, and periodicals directed towards the acquisition of a deeper knowledge of sacred scripture and Catholic doctrine, the nourishment of the spiritual life, the discernment of world conditions, and the discovery and development of suitable methods. B. These aids in formation take into consideration the various types of the apostolate and the milieu they were exercised. C. For this purpose, also centers of higher institutions have been erected, and they have already proved highly successful. So what these subparagraphs are getting at is this idea of this great amount of services to help people out, to help them form themselves. And this is obviously from 6 years ago. So things like this podcast can be added to the things like they're talking about, study sessions and things like that. We do need retreats and spiritual access. We do need study sessions at times to learn about things. It's great to study all the church documents, things like that. Then we do have books and periodicals. I know what was the name of the Catholic Answers magazine is great. I know I've read a few other magazines that have been often highly lay run and things like that are very important for nourishing the spiritual life and helping form me to be a better apostle. And those are important. And it's also at times in places like higher education. We have places like CARA, the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate at Georgetown, which is more of a sociology type thing where they do statistical research and qualitative research as well about things like, what percentage of newly ordained priests went to Catholic school, things like that. Like, if I don't know the exact answer to that, but I know if I went to the CARA website, I could find that out. And those type of things are valuable for understanding where the church is going and what's happening in the church so that we can better adapt to the situation. Now, the final subparagraph, 32D, is about supporting the existing ones and calling for new ones. And the idea here is that we need that harmony because we're not just like, hey, let's all start new. But then also certain times, certain ones get stuck in the mud and it is good to start new. So we have to find that balance. So let's read 32D. The Most Holy Council rejoices over projects of this kind which are already flourishing in certain areas, and it desires that they may be promoted also in other areas where they may be needed. Furthermore, centers of documentation and study, not only in theology, but also in anthropology, psychology, sociology, and methodology should be established for all fields. of the apostolate for the better development of the natural capacity of the laity, men and women, young persons and adults. I think this is pretty clear. We want to support the ones that are good, find where they can help others out, because obviously, for example, something in Canada and the US were very similar cultures. So a lot of times American publications can come up to Canada and things like that. One of the things they do have in Canada is they use a different translation for the lectionary, a different translation of the Bible. So they do have a different publication than the US, which like Magnificat or something like that. There's a different one, and it's escaped my mind right now, it's published in Canada based on the different translation of the Bible. Even though the prayers are all the same translation of the Bible, they use a different one. The Americans use the New American Bible. The Canadians use the New Revised Standard Version. Both are perfectly fine Bible translations to use. I personally use the Revised Standard Translation, usually outside of the Mass, so that's a third one. All those are good. And we need to develop the human capacities, develop those areas, develop our understanding so we can better respond, so we can give a better answer, so we can respond to that hope we have inside of us, as St. Paul says. Anyways, that concludes today. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and if you donate to help StarQuest produce it, another great podcast at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time monthly or join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow we're going to conclude Apostolical Maxiostatum with paragraph 33, which is the conclusion and exhortation of this document. It's pretty short. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. Go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X for more information on the podcast, such as playlists for individual documents and a reading plan. And if you want, there is an SQPN Discord server at sqpn.com/Discord, and on there is a channel for Vatican II in a Year. Amen.